Peace, everyone. Check this out. Let me just pull up something our guest made so that you know we're. Oops. Hold on. That should not happen. Okay, get rid of this. And while this is playing, make sure to hit the likes.
Good evening, listeners, brave navigators of the enigmatic and the concealed. Have you ever felt the pull of the unanswered, the allure of the mysteries that shroud our existence? For more than a decade, a unique comic publisher has dared to dive into these mysteries, unafraid of the secrets they might uncover. This audacious entity is Paranoid American. Welcome to the mystifying universe of the Paranoid American podcast.
Launched in the year 2012, Paranoid American has been on a mission to decipher the encrypted secrets of our world. From the unnerving enigma of MK Ultra mind control to the clandestine assemblies of secret societies. From the awe-inspiring frontiers of forbidden technology to the arcane patterns of occult symbols in our very own pop culture. They have committed to unveiling the concealed realities that lie just beneath the surface. Join us as we navigate these intricate landscapes, decoding the hidden scripts of our society and challenging the accepted perceptions of reality.
Folks, I've got a big problem on my hands. There's a company called Paranoid American making all these funny memes and comics. Now, I'm a fair guy. I believe in free speech as long as it doesn't cross the line. And if these AI-generated memes dare to make fun of me, they're crossing the line.
This is your expedition into the realm of the extraordinary, the secret, the shrouded. Come with us as we sift through the world's grand mysteries, question the standardized narratives, and brave the cryptic labyrinth of the concealed truth. So strap yourselves in, broaden your horizons, and steel yourselves for a voyage into the enigmatic heart of the Paranoid American podcast, where each story, every image, every revelation brings us one step closer to the elusive truth.
Hey, what up? We got a. Hey, what up? Oh, you're muted. You're muted.
Okay, you could tell I'm nervous. That was our guest. It was kind of like Inception.
That's the intro that I use to play my show, and I gotta say, I don't see it as much now because I just plop it into the editor and upload. I don't watch as often. It reminded me that I lucked out about the election because now I don't have to change my intro. That like Trump is still going to be relevant for at least the next few years. So
right,
I don't have to change it up.
Yeah, no, it is pretty relevant, and I saw it in one of your live streams when I was doing my research on you. And I've been subscribed to you for a while. I found you through Donut. And I've been watching you ever since. So our guest today,
Shout out Donut.
Yeah, shout out Donut. If you don't know who Donut is, just YouTube him, and you will see that he basically covers pretty similar themes to what we're going to talk about today or tonight. So our guest today is someone who dives into the rabbit holes most of us wouldn't even dare. If you've been curious about secret societies, the occult, or just how deep conspiracies go, Paranoid American is here to take us on that journey. And I'm just reading from a Substack article I made on him. It's a new format I'm introducing. I'm going to make an article on every guest I bring on the Boq Precision channel. So Paranoid American is an independent creative platform specializing in conspiracy-themed comics, podcasts, and art. He's known for a unique blend of satire, historical references, and esoteric storytelling. His projects invite audiences to explore provocative narratives and hidden truths often omitted from mainstream discourse. So I have a bunch of questions. I'm going to go through with Paranoid American. My first question is, what inspired you to start creating conspiracy themed comics?
I mean, this comes up a lot. I think I've got like a somewhat of a joke answer that has maybe become the real answer. Like maybe there's like too much truth to this, but it kind of was at Santa Claus, man. I found out about Santa Claus, which was a pretty typical thing growing up. And there's like certain ages that people like age out of the Santa mythology. And I
Right.
just remember in that moment, I'm simplifying the thoughts, but it was like, wait, my parents are in on this? Wait, are my grandparents in on this? What about all the teachers at school? What about literally every adult that I've come in contact with in the last, 7 years of my life or whatever? Were they all in on this? And then the more and more I peeled that thing back, that feels like my first conspiracy theory. But if we ignore that one, because that's almost like a coming of age part of just growing up in this type of culture. But
Mm.
the other one, I think I was just started getting into X-Files really big in the
Right.
mid to late 90s. And that felt like it was scratching an itch I didn't even know I had at that point. And once the X-Files episode was over, they don't really answer anything because it's a TV show. So they need those cliffhangers. But I needed to know way more about that. So I remember I would just go and start searching some of the topics that would come up, at UFOs or aliens or whatever, and then started reading about deep underground military bases and these ancient bloodlines of people that are ruling the world. And at that point forward, it was more interesting than any sort of fictional movie or anything. So it just kind of became an obsession. I must have been like not much older than 12 or 13.
Yeah, and I remember X Files basically mainstreaming the UFO mythologies, and it was it was pretty good. It was a pretty good show because it always left every episode on a cliffhanger. I remember.
And
Uh,
it wasn't just UFOs too. That was sort of the storyline that they kept all the different episodes stitched together, but they had cloning and they had like supernatural and werewolves and vampires. It was one of the first all-encompassing paranormal shows that at least I got to start watching. And I think
right.
before that you had like Twilight Zone and you had Outer Limits. You had a few that kind of touched on it, but those ones were ostensibly fictional, or like they were meant to make you think a different way. Whereas X Files kind of implied that this was real, that we were getting an insight into some secret, FBI backroom that Dana Scully and Mulder were operating. And I don't know, that blend of making it more realistic, not campy, compared to all the other approaches up to that point, that was the biggest gateway drug.
So, Paranoid, can you share the origin story behind your Kickstarter campaigns? You had a bunch when I looked into your background, and you have one currently ongoing, and which you're very busy uh, uh, promoting. Uh, can you just share the origin story?
Well, the one that we got going right now is Illuminati comic.
Right,
It'll bring you right to, if you go to illuminaticomic.com, and it's about the Bavarian Illuminati. But the whole origin of running these campaigns at all is just that this crowdfunding approach is such a great way to do this, because two of the biggest challenges when you're making a comic, for example, is that you got the upfront production cost where you get the writers, the editors, artists, everyone that needs to come together to work on this. That
right,
takes a lot of upfront investment. And then even after it's all done conceptually and you got the digital files, or if it's done analog, you've got the actual artwork printed, or the artwork from the artist on paper at least, then you have to go to print it. And that's the biggest gamble, because at least when you work on a comic for the first time, you get an idea of how much it's going to cost, and that's the end of it. But when you go to print, do I print 100? Do I print 1,000? Do I print 10,000? And this was something that I was constantly struggling with, where I would go and just order, say, like 60 copies of a comic that I came out with because I didn't know how much it would sell. And then I have to keep restocking. Or you go all out and you get like 600 or 6,000 or something. And now it's just taking up space for a long time. So, long story short, is that the crowdfunding is a really novel way to figure out exactly how many that I should get printed.
Smart.
which
Yeah.
also means that like I can keep coming up with new projects that I won't get bogged down. So yeah, I've got a whole bunch of different ones listed on the site, mainly because Kickstarter only lets you run one at a time until you turn into like a huge, big like conglomerate, and then they'll
Okay.
let you do multiple ones. So the way that I've figured this out that seems to be working the best is that whatever project has the most number of people following it before it launches, that'll be the next one in line, and then I'll run it, and then after that one runs its course, then I'll go and do the next one. So that's been working out pretty well for the last like year or two, which is when I started doing a lot of this.
Okay.
Before that, didn't really have a particular strategy in mind, but I like it because it allows me to start releasing projects that have been done. Like this particular project, we were actually actively working on. The artwork just finished maybe a month ago, like a
Oh,
week before we started the campaign. But I got other projects right behind this one that have got all the artwork done and has been done for a while, but I just got to wait until there's enough demand to release it.
can I share your promo video? It's pretty cool.
Yeah,
The
please.
Let me just
The
play it.
Illuminati comic.
Exactly. Yeah, that's it.
Illuminati comic. Yeah, Illuminati comic. You know you want it. This Illuminati comic.
Learn about the full history of the Bavarian Illuminati. Adam Weishaupt, Alumbrados, Jesuits, Rosicrucians, Freemasons, and more. From the 18th century to modern day, we expose it all.
Yeah, Illuminati comic. You know you want it. This Illuminati comic.
That's right, it's the Illuminati comic from Donut and Paranoid American. Get yours now at IlluminatiComic.com.
Yeah, that's pretty
Yeah.
sick, man.
Thank
Okay.
you. Thanks for showing it. Yeah, I love the little earworm songs that lodge themselves in your head. And
Who
and
Who's the narrator?
the narrator is an AI combination of Walt Disney and Robert Stack from Unsolved Mysteries. I
Wow.
blended the two of those voices together, and I trained an AI model on both of them. So that's sort of an amalgamation of the two.
That's what makes it catchy, that voice. It's
Yeah,
almost like
and the intro before that was just a straight Robert Stack one, but I kind of want to have one that I develop that's not quite anyone in particular, but it reminds you of a whole bunch of different voices.
oh. So, hey, Paranoid, when I was checking out your Twitter, it said that you previously worked for Disney and you're also ex Air Force, right? But
Yeah, straight out of high school, I joined the Air Force. Stayed in there for my stint for 4 years, and then right after that, I went to school for video game design and programming, and then from there, I joined Disney, and I was at Disney for 10 years. And there was a whole bunch of other little side things in between there. I had music that was placed on Adult Swim and VH1 and MTV, and that was kind of the trajectory that I saw for myself for the longest time, was just working on music and keep rising up through those ranks. And at a certain point, I realized that even if I really liked the music aspect, I really wanted to do like the music videos, but the music videos were too short. So then I wanted to do something a little bit longer, and the perfect format were these little 11-minute segments that you would see on Adult Swim or on Cartoon Network, or growing up it was Nicktoons and Rugrats and Doug. Like that little 11-minute was a perfect little chunk. So that became my new focus, and that was sort of what got me into and developed my career when I was at Disney.
when you started working at Disney, did the occult aspect of like the backdrop of all this occult stuff, was it present from the get-go, or did you stumble on it like while working and you just
No,
like
it was way early because I
right?
remember I came across the Illuminatus trilogy by Robert Anton Wilson in maybe the year 2000, 2001, and I started at Disney I think in 2006.
Nice.
Um, it might have been a little bit earlier than that, but
Nice.
at that point, I was already all in on conspiracies and occultism. I mean, I was reading about the connections between Walt Disney and like Freemasons and all this stuff in the late '90s, way before I was even out of high school. So I entered the adult world already a conspiracy theorist, which has been interesting for me because now a lot of the people that I meet through podcasts or readers or uh, a lot of them are sort of new to the world of conspiracy, and a lot of it
Wow.
came around like 2019 for like this global event that happened, and that was sort of this main catalyst for people questioning the narrative. For me, I think it was 2001. It was 9/11
Mhm.
when I really first thought, okay, maybe there is something to all these crazy conspiracies that I was consuming out of just distrust of government and entertainment, like equal parts of each, but it wasn't so serious that I was going to take up a cause or start living my life any differently. It was just media consumption and entertainment. But when 2001 hit, particularly because I was in the military when that happened, I was like, okay, maybe this isn't just for entertainment. There probably is something way deeper to this. And so, yeah, probably right around 2001 is when I went like all out. I just decided I'm going to read all the books that I want to read about this. I want to be an expert in all these different topics.
Isn't it funny how like both areas like that you were working in are knee deep in occult and secret societies, like the military and Disney. And someone with your interest just finding themselves there, it's like, uh,
Well, I think
what
it's
a
by chance either because Disney made plenty of propaganda. I mean, I
oh right,
grew up
yeah.
seeing some of those Walt Disney propaganda films, and it's not that I think Disney programmed me to join the military, but there's almost like the road to join the military, at least from my perspective, it's at least paved a lot nicer than the road to a lot of the other options you might have. A lot of options aren't even on the map. They're just like dirt paths if you want to go and start your own business or
So true.
there's very few things that are sort of planned out for you. And I mean, in high school, my life was absolutely chaotic. I didn't have a great prospect. Like a lot of, I just joined like the wrong crowds for good reasons and bad reasons. But I needed a quick like escape hatch, and I had kind of burnt a few academic bridges at that point. So the military was the perfect kind of escape hatch, perfectly paved out. So I would almost just blame how much everything caters to the military, video games to entertainment to everything, the military industrial entertainment complex.
And not only that, like world events, you were coming of age right around 9/11. Like, what better recruitment for the industrial complex for young Americans, in 2000, 2001, 2002, teenagers just coming of age. So it was like a whole, uh, like everything all at once came together for you, I guess.
Well,
Like,
and my experience of 9/11 is really a weird one too, because even though I was in the military at the time, I was in training, I was in boot camp, and they
oh,
didn't tell us that 9/11 had even happened until 2 weeks after the fact.
oh
And they
wow.
finally called us all in and like let us know, but I didn't really share in that initial shock or like the first 2 weeks, and apparently the whole country had like joined arms, and it was like it had changed society in a tangible way where people were acting differently out in public just because of this event, and I didn't participate in any of it. I just got out and then finally was now enlisted in the military, and everyone's like super patriotic. Like before, you were wearing a uniform out. No one I mean, you might get like a thank you for your service type of thing, but
Flags everywhere.
yeah, yeah, it was crazy. Yeah, exactly. You go in and there's no one's got the little ribbons on their car and like wearing the pins everywhere. And as soon as I get out, everyone is honoring the military. And I didn't even go through this thing. I didn't share in this trauma that they went through watching it on TV in real
This
time.
this
So it was
never
very
happened to me.
surreal.
What was that like, knowing that you could be quarantined from like a a paradigm shifting event so well? Like in those 2 weeks, did you notice anything in the air? Like I know you were in boot camp, but like maybe there was a civilian coming in and like
Not at all. No, I mean that was probably the to credit what you were originally saying, how well we could be compartmentalized and isolated for the rest of the
100%.
world.
Yeah.
that when they finally told us, it was pretty much a shock. I mean, it was like a slow burn because what happened is one of the people in my flight, they got a letter from their parents, and the parents included like they said something about it in the letter, and the people scanning the mail are supposed to kind of scan for that type of stuff, and I guess it just got through, and then it became almost a rumor, like, oh, my parents said this thing happened, but we would have heard about that, right? And after just an hour or two, I guess something, the rumor got to the drill instructor, and the TI pulled us all in and said, okay, we're going to squelch this right now. Here's what's going on. Here's what happened. Which is crazy because I doubt that they had some kind of game. Like, what do you do if someone's in training and like this huge event happens? War, I don't think there's a page that you turn to that's like, okay, in the case of a surprise terror attack,
Yeah.
here's what you do to the trainees.
I bet you
So
they had
everyone was winging it.
a long, intense meeting about how to break it to the guys, and they're like debating, and people are like shaking people's collars, and
It was
I
weird. I
know
was literally
that
reading the Book of Mormon as they announced it, just because I was so bored, and that was the only book that was in the room that you were allowed to read that wasn't already being used by someone. So yeah, it was like the most surreal experience.
I was in computer class, and I still remember the labs were using Yahoo, not even Google. Yahoo was the main search engine, and it was on the main. I was looking at the monitor, and then it said, "World Trade Center hit by plane." It was like maybe 9 a.m. And 10 minutes later, one of the administrative staff of the teacher tells us to move to the quadrangle where they had the big, big screen TV, and they just turned on CBC, and they were talking about it. And 15 minutes later, they sent us home. And the next day, when I met up with, I still remember this, one of my classmates. She's like, it was all that was on TV. the whole the whole day, every channel, even the like BET, MTV, even the music channels were talking about the
Well, they
World
didn't
Trade.
want anyone to change the channel to get an update on it, so you might as well
Exactly.
just all cover it. Yeah.
It was full throttle coverage. There was no escaping it. And I remember, and I have a very distinct Islamic name, and I was like, my mom wears the hijab, and we were worried about the stuff we were hearing in the news, but none of that even happened. It was so weird. The one thing happened. My mom once, there was this civic building she was going in, uh, uh, and there was an anthrax scare, and they had to
Yeah.
lock down like the building, and she was in, and she called me, and she panicked, and I didn't know what to do, so I called the Toronto Star. I told them, I was like, "Yeah, they locked down my mom in this building, and they got people in the
Did they
hazmat
respond
suits."
to that?
Uh, it was just it was a nothing burger. Nothing happened after maybe a half an
Those
hour.
came up all the time. That was a huge thing, especially after 9/11 happened.
Yeah,
We had so many anthrax lockdowns on base where like an envelope would just show up, and people would freak out, and it would disrupt the entire day for thousands of people. Yeah, I've got a bunch of crazy like weird anthrax scare stories that were all nothing burgers. And actually, you mentioned something that made me think of, it was a whole nother Santa Claus story again, because while we were in training for those 2 weeks that we weren't allowed to know about 9/11, like we were absolutely interacting with civilians, the people that were cutting our hair, the people that were giving us our clothes, like all of the people that weren't also enlisted, they were all keeping up the same facade and not
wow.
bringing up this thing that was a huge event. I didn't even realize, I never even thought about all of the people that we interacted with that were all keeping that a secret.
Do you see the symbolism in that? The lesson, the ability to keep secrets is a thing. Like, I know, I remember talking. Oh, speaking of, a friend of the show, he's a wonderful guy. Armin's asking. He told me in private he recognized you from an interview you conducted with Fakeologist. Do you remember Fakeologist?
Yeah, I need a refresher.
Yeah, he's a Canadian. He's a fellow Canadian. He basically has a open forum for people like you in his channel. So Armin's asking, what's your view on fakeology? It's like hoaxing and
Intentional hoaxing,
intentional hoaxing. Yeah, false flags and whatnot.
Well, I guess without knowing the full definition of fakeology, there's kind of two camps that it could be in. There's one where it's intentional for manipulative and nefarious reasons, and then there's it's intentional but for like just the lulz, like just to make someone think that they saw Bigfoot or something. Unfortunately, the two are somewhat indistinguishable because this gets into kind of conspiracy philosophy, but that regardless of the intent, it's kind of the outcome that really matters. So let's say, for example, someone does just like a silly Bigfoot footage, but it takes, the world by storm and someone ends up, succumbing to it. Like someone fatally does something they wouldn't have otherwise, except for they saw this weird prank video, right? Or they get themselves into a bad situation or hurt, or it starts like maybe Tide Pods, like the first person that was like, hey, did you know if you eat this Tide Pod, you get really high and you like talk to Jesus or something, right? And then a bunch of kids start eating Tide Pods and die from it. That there's really no difference from someone saying like, oh my God, that was just a joke. I didn't mean for a bunch of people to get sick on Tide Pods versus someone sitting down and meticulously planning out, all right, what can I do to hurt the most amount of people possible? If I come up with this, okay, I'll say Tide Pods. What could I say about, instead of planning it out, it doesn't really matter. And the same thing can kind of be said about even political conspiracies or any other type, that you don't really know what the intent was behind it. You don't know if someone started it for a nefarious reason, if it was an accident, they got out of control. All you really know is how the situation was handled and what the ultimate outcomes were. So I guess the fakeology, would be impossible to really determine the difference if someone was intentionally doing it or if they're just spreading misinformation that they've regurgitated, or if someone's just shooting from the hip and didn't do all of their research but are still deciding to present the case anyways. Now, if we're talking false flags, that is the lab manufactured version of this, where you start with the lie or you start with the thing that you want to cover up and then like custom mold everything around it so that it works. So that's almost at like the professional level. So that you can't really help from happening. Anyone that can ever has better technology than you or better information than you will always be able to pull that kind of fakeology on you. The ones that I guess I'm more in favor of or more ambivalent about, more neutral on, are like the fake UFO footage or the fake AI I guess I'm a little biased too because I do like some fake AI videos
Yeah.
and stuff. But ultimately, again, I guess the intent's different. Some people might be doing that to undermine the very fabric of trust and of society and everything in general. And that's one way to do it, is to continuously pollute it. I don't see that as being my intent, even if I have the same result as those kind of people. But mine is more uh, use it for entertainment, make it so that it looks real enough, but doing something so ridiculous that of course it can't be true. So that if anyone does fall for it, it's a
It's on
little bit
them.
on them, but it's a
Yeah.
little bit on them. Yeah, like maybe I'm karma free of that, but also it is a reminder to not trust everything you see. I remember the first version of like an article telling people to not trust pictures. There was like a Reader's Digest from like, I'm gonna make up a year. I think it was like 98. But they had a Reader's Digest and it had OJ Simpson wearing these pink bunny slippers on his feet. And it just said, don't believe everything you see. And I remember even then, I was like, okay, yeah, so nothing that we ever see necessarily can be trusted just because it went far and wide. This was a really amazing, pivotal moment for me because I don't think that I saw Photoshop as anything other than making like a album cover or some weird 3D text or thing. And then I realized, oh, you can change reality with this and people will fall for it. So that also I think would fall under fakeology. Even an article about, hey, look, this is fake. Look how real it looks, even though it's fake. Technically, that's fake. It's like a manual for how to be fakeology.
Isn't this why they say there's white magic and then there's black magic or like like evil magic, and
Well,
then
and
there's
it's
also
also why there's manslaughter and there's first degree homicide. A lot of
right.
that comes down to the intent. If you planned to drive over somebody and take them out, and you had it marked on your calendar, and you've got notes going back months saying like I'm going to hit this person this time, it's a completely different criminal charge than if you just accidentally run them over. But if they can decide in a court of law that one case wasn't an accident, you actually planned it, it's a completely different charge. So we obviously put a lot of importance on intent. I think that that's a weird, surreal set of rules to live by, because now someone that can just obscure their intent can get away with things and make it seem like there were accidents and vice versa.
Nice. So this is a good segue, I think, because I wanted to ask you about uh, your occult Disney series. And, Disney would like parents to believe it's, harmless, childlike wonder is their focus, or it's the only sort of magic their brand has been selling. Then, that's not true. And Disney movies and programs have always been teaching children the magic arts, which is the basic basis of esotericism and secret societies. So, in other words, for almost a century now, Disney has been training generations of children on the occult. Can you elaborate on your quote unquote occult Disney content and why you think it's significant, knowing that you've worked with Disney, the company?
Yeah, and so yeah, you can. I haven't had this taken down yet, so you can go to occultdisney.com and it should bring you to like a
Oh,
playlist of all the
and
Occult Disney episodes. This was something that started right after I was on Tinfoil Hat for the first time with Sam Tripoli,
nice. I love Sam.
talking about Occult Disney.
Yeah.
And we pretty much focused on Fantasia and Pinocchio and Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, because those
Oh,
are some of like the biggest bangers occult speaking. But after that, I got contacted by this guy Matt Comegys, who is that's my co-host right there. That we do all of the occult Disney movies. He was like, "Hey, I really like that episode. Would you be interested in just doing every single feature length adult animation or Disney animation for this occult Disney series?" So that's kind of how it started. It was just a little side
oh,
project for an existing podcast that turned into its own thing.
sick.
And yeah, so I think that Disney owning some of the information about teaching kids magic, some of it was intentional, some unintentional, some of it was always going to happen because Walt Disney himself was raised in this Demolay secret society for kids. Is basically Freemasonry for kids, like a
Oh,
cross between Cub Scouts and Freemasonry in a way. And
oh, wow.
he's raised in this environment, so he already understands secrets and symbolism and oaths and rites and magic rituals and all that. Guaranteed he knew what all of this stuff meant, and he probably also realized how strong mythos was at embedding ideas. That you can tell someone a story or you can give them something to read, but if you can make them feel it in all the different senses and make it feel like it's serious and sacred and something worthy to be passed on, then it has staying power. So, as far as I know, he never went into the Freemasons after that. He just left Demolay, or he aged out of it essentially, but took that same mentality and thinking that was impressed on him at a very young and impressionable age and used that for the rest of his career. And one of the things that he also hit on really early was taking these Grimm fairy tales, and a lot of people don't realize how popular the Grimm's fairy tales was. It was the best-selling book outside of the Bible for a long period of time.
You're
So
talking about
everyone
the
knew it.
Mother's Grimm, right? The all the
It was Brothers
classic.
Grimm, and then
Oh, I mean
there was
Brothers Grimm.
Mother Goose, which was like one of the competitors, but Brothers Grimm was unique in that these weren't just the most popular and watered down children's tales. The Brothers Grimm started as historians. In fact, their first two books were incredibly extensive history on like the Germanic people.
All
And
right.
at a certain point, they got really inspired to start tracing down all these folk tales that kept coming up as they were doing history that were sort of unreported and lesser known compared to like Greek and Roman mythology. So the Brothers Grimm almost single-handedly reinvigorated like Germanic folklore and culture. And through all of these books, what also made them different is they basically went and collected all of the different folklore and cherry picked the best ones and redistributed them and put them out in the standard format, so now everyone could sort of share in this. Uh,
Sick.
and and Walt Disney sees these as being stories that have already lasted, in some case, thousands of years, right? Very, very long amounts of time. Chicken Little's an example that goes back to 200 BC or earlier.
Wow.
So a lot of these stories are, you could almost argue, like ingrained in our DNA in some ways. That if our parents for like many generations were all hearing these same stories over and over, why not use this as some of the ingredients that you put into your product, your literal product that you're going to bring to market? Because now Disney has positioned themselves, and again, I think in terms of what actually has happened now, if you look at Disney now, they kind of own childhoods, they own nostalgia. If someone says princess, a lot of the time they're going to think of a Disney princess. If someone says Bambi, they think of Disney's version of Bambi and Pinocchio and all of these public domain stories that have been around, in some cases hundreds or thousands of years. Disney owns the visual that gets conjured up in your brain when you hear just this word that's been around for this amount of time. So I don't think a lot of that is by accident. And a lot of that goes into why I think the Occult Disney podcast and the whole project is so important, is that it's literally the mythology that that belongs to a completely different growth of people outside of just Roman and Greek mythology and Native American mythology, like the things that come up frequently in regular schools. This is a whole different aspect. And the future version of this, people, I really do think they're going to look back at Disney films and be like, oh, this is their Mithras and this is their Zeus and their pantheon. But their pantheon is Frozen and Bambi and Pinocchio and all of these IPs. Because look at how many temples we've built to them. Look at all of the little adornments and tchotchkes, and people are walking around wearing these Mickey Mouse and stuff on their shirts and spending all this money. How could, if they just imagine that all civilization ends and 1,000 years someone finds it again, it almost seems there would be no other logical conclusion other than, oh, they were worshiping this Mickey Mouse character. Let's figure out what this stands for.
Yeah, look at this from the IMDb, the 100 best Disney movies ever. And it's exactly what you're talking about. I don't understand the ranking they use, but like,
It's IMDb. It's whoever makes the list gets to decide the rank. And that's one of the reasons we decided to just go chronologically. There's a few rules to make it wieldy. So it has to have some type of animation in it. It has to be a feature-length movie, and it has to be distributed by Disney. So those three rules allowed us to like go chronologically in order and make some sense out of the chaos. Because otherwise, there's so many Disney. Like you could spend your entire lifetime and probably not be able to see them all.
I know. And what basic themes have you picked up from your research on these Disney animations and movies?
There's one in particular that we've even given a name to now that I call the Disney proxy. And the Disney proxy basically states that you take away the protagonists, like the main character, you take away their authority figure. So usually the protagonist in a Disney movie tends to be a kid, and the authority figure will usually be a parent. Sometimes they tweak that a little bit, but there's always a kid and some sort of guardian. And over time, Disney has refined this formula where they kill the guardian, or the kid gets kidnapped or otherwise separated from the guardian. And then the first character that shows up to kind of save the day is going to be the sidekick that has toys and cartoons and t-shirts and lunchboxes and stuff fashioned after it. And it becomes so formulaic because it works so damn well. And that's probably the number one theme. And I would almost make an argument here that using symbolism to sell products and get money from people to then reinvest back in your company to make more symbolism that, you know, programs more people to spend money, like this self-perpetuating thing, that's kind of indistinguishable from any other magic you could do. If you had a magic to put somebody into a trance or to, make yourself rich. Like, this is that spell. This is the spell that puts people into a trance and then extracts their riches from them and then turns into sort of an automatic process. So that's just as magical as slipping subversive messages or like sexualizing content. That can all come secondary as long as you can print money. And that's kind of what Disney has figured out how to do, is how to just print money and do it in a conspiratorial way, like a Fabian way, where they don't necessarily need to make profit on that movie this year or next year or even in 10 years. They're trying to make these movies to continue owning nostalgia so that
Mhm.
they own what you think when you hear Pinocchio. They own what your kids think and what your grandkids think. They will own the version of, like, the mainstream version of all of these stories in perpetuity.
Make sure to hit the likes. I'm seeing people come in. We've been going for a good 40 minutes. It went by so fast. I still haven't even touched my main questions. Paranoid, uh, what you just said about symbolism is a good segue to a few questions I'm going to ask you. I'm not done with the Disney stuff, but that's good because I know you're also an expert in symbolism, and I just wanted to share a few things I noticed. But why do you think Walt Disney was like? How did he become such an influential person? Like, who is this? Who was this guy, Walt Disney?
Well, Walt Disney had a vision of animation to bring it to people in a completely different, like, what we see from Disney is not really what he originally envisioned. He started something that was so big and had so much momentum, that by the time he died, it had all this momentum to keep building. And what we see now is like a corporate version of that original, like, spark that Disney created. But his original idea, especially even for Fantasia. Fantasia was a great example of this, was that they would go around the country and play this animation on a screen, but then have live music. And so it was kind of like a party atmosphere. It was a thing that it would be different every city that you went to, because sometimes the band would change out, and there was like some improvisational aspects to it. And that really was a completely different experience than going to a traditional movie theater. He saw himself as competing with the regular cinema, and a lot of this, a lot of his controversial past, as people criticize him for, it was because he was trying to get into Hollywood, and he was
Mm.
not a Hollywood insider. He was this weird Demolay kid, that didn't really fit into the typical Hollywood type,
Oh
and
wow!
he was building a huge chip on his shoulder over this, over and over again. And he was very vocal about how much he hated all the Hollywood producers. So I
What?
think at a certain point it turned from him wanting to compete, and offer something better and more entertaining than what he saw as an option, and then it turned into like vengeance and revenge, and like now he had to do this out of principle, which is a very driving force, I think, for him.
I didn't realize they shunned him basically. Like he
Well,
wasn't.
yeah, there's a lot of like anti-Semitic criticism. If you start putting those two words into Google and Disney, there's a lot of
Right.
jokes too. If you watch like Futurama and Simpsons, I think every once in a while they'll do a little jab.
Yeah.
That's where a lot of that came from. It came from originally him trying to get into this world of Hollywood and just completely being shunned because he was not an insider. And they had more than enough insiders to go around, so there was no reason to just open the door and let some crazy kid from the mid America to come in here. So that was one of the main reasons. And then when he starts making it work, now he becomes an inspiration for everyone else that had ever been shunned by Hollywood as well. So it becomes almost like a grassroots movement of, hey, here's this alternative to entertainment. The thing that happens though is the world changes out from under him. The technology develops so fast that it no longer becomes feasible to do this roadshow style animation with live music and all that. Technicolor comes out and stereo recordings come out, and like, digital, all of this slowly starts coming together. It changes his course, but again, he had already built the momentum, and he had such a driving reason for why he was doing all of this mixed with like the best recipe on earth. Take stories that have been told for 1,000 years already and just modernize them. No one was really doing it very well.
I have this just came into me now. It's a theory. Hear it out. You notice how in the early animations like Fantasia and all that, there was a lot of occult symbols like out in the open, not even hidden. Like later on, they did the subliminal stuff, but his early stuff was all out in the open, occult. Like Mickey Mouse is a wizard, and he has the little demons and all that. Maybe he was signaling to the insiders in Hollywood, "Hey, I know some of the secret knowledge, guys. Let me in."
Honestly, that's a fine theory, man. I think that's because it's like, look, I'm not just a bumpkin playing around with my crayons over here. Like I've got the occult teachings too. Like I've got my own esoteric teachings. But I think at that point he realized that Hollywood was a closed door system. It was like what you would call a walled garden. That unless you were born in that walled garden or were invited for some specific reason, like you can knock on that gate all you want and you're not getting in.
And now it makes sense. As soon as you mentioned, like, now it makes sense the anti-Semitism that is tied to Walt Disney. I always wondered, like there was nothing about him that made me think, oh, this man is pro, the painter with a mustache. But
Right,
him
no,
being,
no. In fact, he was anti that. He was
see,
anti
oh,
German. In World War II, he was advocating strongly for U.S. war bonds and was doing lots of propaganda for the U.S. So he was staunchly pro. In fact, he also, this is one of my favorite like weird stories that it's hard to prove, but there's enough documentation that I feel like it's close enough to true. But if you want to look into this,
let me.
the he was made a special agent in charge in the FBI, or it might have been the FBN at that point, but he was made special agent in charge, and his role was to basically go covert and report back to the government anyone that had anti-American sentiments in the animation industry. So he
Oh
was
wow.
actually he was kind of like, it wasn't directly from McCarthyism, but it was sort of a similar aspect to that. I believe he got his clearance directly from J. Edgar Hoover, and this is where the story gets even weirder. Yeah, this is right here. But the weirdest part of this story is that Walt Disney had daddy issues growing up. I haven't
Yeah.
found a lot of great reliable information on exactly what happened between him and his dad, but they had a very strained relationship to the point where Walt Disney himself thought that he had been kidnapped as a kid from like some bigger like a royal family. Essentially, he thought he was some kind of prince and that he had been kidnapped and was being forced to live with what you might equate to his evil stepmother and stepfather. um and
Okay.
and
So
the
that.
FBI finds out about this and
Uh-huh.
they start stringing him along. Someone tells him, I'll simplify it, but
Mhm.
someone in the FBI tells him, "Hey, Walt, I don't know if you ever had this feeling, but we think you were kidnapped as a kid and that your real dad is actually was the king of Spain or has the lineage of the king of Spain in him. Like you are literal royal blood and we'll help you look into this. We've got the resources, but we want you to help us out first. We want you to look into the animation market and tell us if there's any they started, that was the carrot though. The carrot was they exploited this weird daddy issue that he had, and they basically watched a bunch of Disney movies and said, they psychoanalyzed them and said, "Oh, this guy thinks that he's a kidnapped princess that's being forced to clean up after his stepmother, so let's use that." So that was part of it. That was the carrot, and then they gave him the little badge, and they gave him all this authority, in order to manipulate him.
Wow. So they basically ran ops on poor Walt. I feel bad for him now, man. I thought he was an evil, like genius, but he was also a victim of social engineering himself. Poor guy.
The evil genius gives him a lot more credit, and maybe not enough credit in other fields. Where like he was an absolute genius businessman, and he really did have a passion for animation and cartoons. Like that, it almost would be sacrilege to even imply that he didn't, at least at the very core of his essence, really wanted to make animation. So you can't discount the whole cartoon part. But yeah, obviously he was self-serving in a lot of these cases. He wasn't a perfect person either. But I think that he just amassed so much power through the attention and the money that he was making and just the influence that he could establish, that he kind of becomes a vector for power. And now anyone that manipulates that vector of power, they can make that thing evil or good or anything they want it to be.
Yeah. I think I've asked you everything I wanted to about Disney, Walt Disney, the company, but something you said earlier about symbols is a good segue to my next set of questions, because you've also uh, made up extensive presentations about uh, how symbols are hidden in plain sight and how they're used to influence like societal norms. And I found this Pinterest just as a placeholder, like corporate logos, for instance. Look at all these oil company logos and the occult symbols they use. And this is from a guy named Richard Casaro, and there's a bunch of
This
other ones.
there's a really really good presentation that I always recommend when this topic comes up. It's from a 2003 Conspiracy Con meeting, and it's
Oh,
by Michael Sarion, and I believe it's called "The Subversive Use of Sacred Symbolism in the Media." It's about 40 minutes, I think, or so, and it's a summary of a very long, like 8-hour series that he's got. But that 40-minute video is probably one of the best introductions to all of this, and he covers a lot of these different logos. There's a lot of different interpretations on this, so I think the most vanilla and practical version is that anyone that goes through art school is
mhm,
going to have to learn about art theory and Gestalt. And some of these are just like the absolute basic building blocks of making artwork. For example, understanding the concepts of repetition and scale. And then there's even concepts when you start integrating sacred geometry or a Fibonacci sort of sequence in your artwork. One one of the cooler ones when I was like really big into graphic design, that was what I was doing day in day out. Is there's a lot of corporate logos out there that all start with just a bunch of circles. Like they'll recreate some of the biggest corporate logos you've ever seen and show how that they've all been constructed from perfect circles and all these different geometric formulas and ratios, that it's not someone just plopped some words on a screen and moved around until it looked good, that it act like it mathematically makes some sort of sense. And what it's doing is, on a very deep level, it's comforting you. It's letting you know that, hey, there's some sort of harmony or pattern to this, so that in the back of your brain is not scrambling to find the pattern. You make it really obvious. And part
mhm,
of that is just reusing things that come up normally in life. So that the five-pointed star, the pentagram, or the pentacle, or all these different iterations of it, that's also one of those sacred geometric things that, like, the ratio between all of those legs and the parts of that, it's comforting to like the human psyche at a deep, like maybe like a biological level.
mhm,
So all we see is that organizations and companies and secret societies and religions, they'll co-opt these symbols that already are meaningful to us for reasons we might not even understand. It'll already be meaningful. The Vesica Pisces is another really good one. It kind of looks like an eye. It's just two intersections of a circle. It
Well,
also might look like a naked female with the legs open. There's all these different interpretations of it's two crescent moons facing each other. But also what it is a very soothing and like pattern filled symbol that your brain doesn't have to struggle to sort of recognize. So now if you can lay something else on top of that, like a MasterCard symbol, you see it and you're like, let's say you've never seen the MasterCard logo
mhm,
before ever in your life. The first time you see it, it already looks familiar because it's a shape that already exists as maybe like a platonic solid type symbol. Could also be, if you ever seen water ripple,
mhm,
like all of these things already exist in real life and you see them constantly. So these are some of the most genius symbols to turn a corporate logo into. I mean, I did it for myself. Even my Paranoid American logo, it's just a triangle inside a circle and a Vesica Pisces inside that. So it's the same exact concept of like, don't reinvent the wheel here. Someone already discovered a really powerful symbol, and then you can just adopt it for your own use. And I think that's another important thing to keep in mind about symbols, is that the symbol doesn't come pre-baked with meaning. Like even like the scariest symbol ever, like the German symbol or like an upside down cross or something, like those by themselves doesn't inherently carry any sort of meaning to it. It's something that you can put meaning onto. So like the a star or an upside down star, all these weren't even considered evil for the longest time until someone wrote that in the book, and now all of a sudden a bunch of people consider them as evil. They used to be sacred.
Yeah, you find like the swastika in temples all over the world. So it must have meant something holy to those people when they're carving it on a side of a
Well,
temple wall.
the swastika in particular is the oldest known illustration of the procession of the equinoxes that we've got. Like it's the most ancient visual illustration where the ancient peoples were, tracing the movement of the stars, and that's typically the pattern that emerges after you plot that over so many years. And that also explains why so many cultures have the exact same symbol on different corners of the earth.
Like check out this simple symbol they use for the loading, uh like when something is loading, a video or whatever is loading. This symbol reminds me of the twirling dervishes, right? When
Right.
like, because that's what they look like. They're basically twirling in a clockwise uh like
Well, just
dance.
even that, just so that's another interesting part of symbols, that a lot of people get caught up in a symbol being some static thing that can be carved into like a rock. But just the very fact that you said clockwise animation, like the
All
fact
right.
that it's animating clockwise and not counterclockwise, that in itself has its own meaning that means something, right? Because if it were going counterclockwise, it would almost seem like something's being undone or you're reverting back to some earlier state, versus if it's going clockwise, you're expecting something new to come, like a new change to happen.
Paranoid, what is your take on Satanists and Satanism?
It's a whole bunch of different versions of this. So you got Luciferians, which, or you can almost call them like Prometheans, which believe that Lucifer or Prometheus or some other fallen angel is a benevolent source of information and brought information that God didn't want people to have. This is the snake in the garden. That there's that version of Satan, where Satan represents the knowledge of good and evil. And that's why I usually call it Promethean or Luciferian. Then you've got like the Anton LaVey kind of Satanist. This is the cartoon, two-horned, pitchforked, goatee guy. And this one gets more into the theatrics, people that want to live in the extremes of society, that are almost, you could just call them like edgelords. Like they're just kind of professional edgelords. Then you've got these new wave of atheist slash agnostic Satanists, and they're mostly a litigious kind of like social movement, where really a lot of that can be unpeeled as they are so anti-religion that this is the pendulum swinging the other way and saying, hey, all the things that the government allowed, the main accepted religions to do, let's force their hand and show them that like we can make them do things that they wouldn't want to be connected to just because through freedom of religion. Like, so that's why it has like this litigious aspect to it. Then you've got an Aleister Crowleyan sort of Satanism, where it's a kind of a like he's the OG DNA that fed all these other ones, but I think his was more about of demonic possession and summoning daemons, almost in like a classical Greek daemon sense, as opposed to a biblical demon. So you've got all these different iterations of Satanists. So I don't know. It would almost be like, let's dissect each one by one and see what makes each of them tick. And then there's also a final group where it's just anyone that doesn't worship Christianity the way that I personally do is instantly a Satanist. And I hear this one is probably the most one that comes up. I mean, there's versions of Protestants that think Catholics are Satan, and that they're all following some dark lord. And then there's other like offshoots of Christianity that are lesser accepted, and those are, all being deceived. So it's a huge net to cast now to call someone a Satanist.
Yeah, it almost lost its meaning because it can mean just anything.
I mean, I would if someone brought it up and I could select the type we're talking about, I would probably prefer to steer it towards the Luciferian type of
Right.
Satanists, the ones that almost acknowledge that there is some sort of fallen entity or a dark side to the light side, but usually when it comes up of like, are you a Satanist? Are you a Luciferian? Then it implies that they see value in whatever that like Luciferian philosophy might offer, as opposed to shunning it or being scared of it. And usually that type of Luciferian Satanist Promethean, they don't necessarily lean into the theatrics and like the drama of it. They don't put on the robe and shave their head and start chanting and making a big show out of it. It's way more of a philosophical thing.
Mm. Oh, yeah. The reason I brought up Satanism is because I'm kind of maybe jumping the gun, but you
No,
have
not at all. This is another one that once enough people sign up for this page, then this one will launch too.
nice. Yeah, because I see it saying launching soon. Satanic Panic, a comic about the history of Satanism. And can you just tell us a little bit about this project?
Yeah, the inspiration for this was because I grew up during the 80s, 90s, what you would call Satanic Panic.
Oh, right.
And I've read a lot of books on this because once you get deep enough into conspiracy lore, a lot of the end goal of these people, it's like, well, it's Satan's pulling all the strings, or it's these Satanists in government or Satanists in Hollywood. So I started reading as much as I could about all of this, like the Satanic Panic and just the Satanic Bible by Anton LaVey. I read all of the books that everyone was scared to read or bring up. And one of the themes specifically in the Satanic Panic books is they said it was all just a ruse, that it was just this mass hysteria that the country had worked itself into, that just happened around the 80s and 90s, and there was never really anything to it. There was never any proven groups of organized satanic criminals doing anything. And the more and more I read like official books that were 5 stars on Amazon, and you should read this one, this is the definitive edition, they all followed that exact same line, but it was not lining up with so many of the other like conspiracy historical accounts. So I kind of set out to figure out exactly when did the Satanic Panic start, what were the ruses, who disproved it, when did they disprove it. And the weirdest thing happened is that I got to the early 80s, and the one catalyst that gets brought up the most is actually a book that came out of Canada called Michelle Remembers.
Oh, wow.
And
Never
if you
heard
don't
of it.
know have you heard of this?
No, never.
So yeah,
Yeah.
Michelle, yeah, he just adds it. Yeah, I've actually got an original copy of I didn't get it in the 80s, but I hunted down a copy. So Michelle Remembers was this huge catalyst to kind of spark what gets claimed to be the 80s, 90s Satanic Panic. But if you keep reading backwards, before Michelle Remembers came out, then you had like the Sharon Tate murders, right? And you had movies like what was the Rosemary's Baby? Rosemary's Baby predates Michelle Remembers. And Rosemary's Baby was literally about a satanic coven of people that are doing, horrible satanic things. And so that was clearly before the Satanic Panic. And then I started trying to just trace, okay, how much was Satan specifically coming up in fiction and books and novels and movies? And were there any court cases? And yeah, there was, as far as I could tell, there was never really a start to the Satanic Panic in America. It kind of came over here with the Pilgrims, like with the original people that moved here the very first time. As soon as they saw Native Americans doing their own, ritual dances and worshiping their own gods, they were like, oh my God, Satan is here. So the Satanic Panic has existed in America since the very first settlers stepped foot on the country that brought all of their own superstitions with them. So that was one of the areas that it started. And then I started tracing okay, well, when did this like fictionalized version of like the pointy eared guy with, you know, the pitchfork and all of that, and piecing together all those different ingredients, and it kept coming up with very similar references and answers. So the Satanic Panic comic is my best way of taking all that research, like 5 or 6 years of research, and all of the debunking claims and all of the debunking claims and mentions of serial murders and infiltration of music industry. I put it all into this one panel or this one booklet to hopefully show like my journey and my education, because it disproves the idea that the Satanic Panic was isolated to the 80s and 90s, that it was always here and it's always going to be here.
Right. Makes sense that it's an aspect of American society embedded from its early inception, like from the Pilgrims, and there's satanic panics are a common thing the world over. Um, they happen in different ways. I remember a friend of mine telling me in Sudan there was a satanic panic where people thought they were getting castrated. Men thought they were getting castrated while asleep. So all these people would like run amok, thinking their testicles got chopped off. And when he deep dove into it, he said it's epigenetic memory because of slavery, like the Arab slavers. A lot of the times they would castrate captives enslaved from that area. So to this day, something like that happening can only be explained that people have this uh, like spirally or panicky aspect embedded in them, and then it's like a mass cultural thing that gets you know it accelerates with its own energy and so on. But
Well, the epigenic memory is a great way to kind of phrase that. And I'm almost on the fence between, does the memory come from it happening, or does the actual action of them castrating maybe come from like an ongoing archetype that exists outside of even slavery? Like, for example, another thing that people would do back in like ancient days is these incantation bowls. I don't know if you ever heard or seen one of these, but in
I'll look them up.
incantation bowls, they basically will take the image of a god or a goddess, they'll draw it. Is also one of the first examples of cartoons and like comic strips. So but they'll, in an incantation bowl, they'll draw a picture of the
Oh,
god in the middle, and then they'll basically write in a spiral like all of their prayers or their wants or like warnings to this god, and then they'll take this bowl and you'll bury it outside. And one of the reasons that people would do and make these incantation bowls is that if in the middle of the night they had a dream about Lilith or Lamashtu, or there's a whole bunch of different versions, but it was this female wind goddess,
I've
or
heard of
I guess
Lilith.
demon. So well, Lilith is one of like a more modern, I think, like Judeo Christian like amalgam. It goes back to Lamashtu. It goes back to
Oh,
even
Sumer.
Tenet. But it goes to Sumer. It's a very very old archetype. But this was the same thing as it. If you had a dream about Lamashtu or Lilith in the middle of the night, then you were effectively castrated until you got a curse pulled off of you. And they even made it legal where you would have to get divorced from Lilith, even though Lilith, like, you don't have her, like, because she's a god of the night. But that if you had a nocturnal dream about Lilith, then you were effectively divorced from your wife until you got a divorce from Lilith. And you would get a divorce by making one of these incantation bowls and burying it and all this. But effectively, it meant that you could no longer, procreate with your wife until you went through this process. So there's very, even older than slavery, epigenetic type memories of being afraid that you'll get castrated in the middle of the night.
Yeah, it must be something universally human, maybe from like our like from our hunter gatherer days. Maybe we were uh prey back then to something horrible like that. If
Well, our structure hasn't changed much. Like the way that we're built and the way that our brains operate, and just all the mechanics. The only thing that's really changed is that the information that we put inside of the brain, but everything else is damn near identical to what it was, even to the ancients, even to like Sumerians. So it wouldn't be so out of pocket to imagine that we have the same weird dreams in the middle of the night that they do.
oh, Paranoid, I wanted to share another project of yours. This one is called Never a Straight Answer, and you can figure out what the anagram. Well, no, that's not the word for it. What do you call it when you
Yeah, you had it. You had it.
yeah, the the anagram for Never a Straight Answer. And this is another project. I think oh yeah, this one was finished. But
This is the one that I put out right before
current one.
the Illuminati one, yeah. And this one is, man, this one was a project of passion and love and tears and sweat and, and sleepless night. It was about 5 years to get this one all put together. It's an anthology of as many different Stanley Kubrick and NASA conspiracy theories that I could manage to squeeze into this. Every weird little offhanded remark or interview or article or Twitter thread that said, "Hey, have you ever heard this?" I try to take all of those and put it into this one comic. And at the same time, make it entertaining and kind of fun, but also put forth my sort of theory, which was that it would be crazy to think that the government didn't have a backup plan, that they wouldn't have hired Stanley Kubrick. Like, name a reason why they wouldn't. It wasn't budget. It wasn't because they've got too many morals or too much, they're too ethical. The only reason is that it just seems unbelievable. But that's not really anything that's ever stopped the government from doing something. So the whole premise of this comic is that it just accepts it as fact. It doesn't try and convince you that Stanley Kubrick directed the moon landings. That's just the entire premise of the book. And the rest of the book is kind of about the mundane issues that come up as he's trying to teach these, astronauts and make them act like actors, or the unreasonable requests that would come across on a Hollywood soundstage set, and like the weird parties that maybe go on afterwards, and like the crazy financiers. So it just gets into all of the deep conspiracy lore.
Can I play the promo video?
Please.
All right, I'll play it. I like your videos.
I don't hear the audio, but I guess that's all right.
No, s- no sound.
Yeah, there was no audio coming out of the video for some reason.
Oh, I hear. Okay, it's my end. Hold on, because the audio is playing for me. Let me just 1 second.
Yeah, I do my best for every project to come up with a catchy jingle, because I mean, I grew up on catchy jingles in the car driving around, so I always like to make sure that I have the same thing. And I hear from people months after a project releases, they're like, "I'm still hearing that damn song in my head," so it
They're
works.
so catchy. Yeah, you figured out the earworm aspect. Okay, let me see if this works.
Ready
Got
for a
it.
conspiracy about
Does it work now?
Yes.
Okay. Nice.
Stanley Kubrick, moon landings, and the CIA? Go visit nasacomic.com.
NASAcomic.com, CIA's biggest con. Stanley Kubrick put us on, that's why we're singing this song. I'm NASAcomic.com, go visit NASAcomic.com. Go visit NASAcomic.com. Yeah, go visit NASAcomic.com. Oh, NASAcomic.com, CIA's biggest con. Stanley Kubrick put us on, that's why we're singing this song. about NASAcomic.com. Go visit NASAcomic.com. Go visit NASAcomic.com. Yeah, go visit NASAcomic.com.
Never a Straight Answer is a 40-page comic about Stanley Kubrick directing the Apollo space missions.
Yeah, go visit NASAcomic.com.
This is the perfect read for comic, Kubrick, or conspiracy fans of all ages. For more details, visit nasacomic.com.
Thank you for showing that.
No, trust me. Anyone who listens to this is going to play in their mind over and over, because it happened to me while I was researching all your different little promo videos, a minute to 2 minutes long. But I think you made a compilation of it. Yeah, I think I saw you had a album of your promo videos.
I've got a playlist on YouTube, but it wasn't like an intentional playlist to like sit down and watch them all. But yeah, I guess there's so many in there now that you could probably just spend like a half hour watching a bunch of various like commercials and stuff that I put together.
By the way, my green screen was flailing while the audio was flailing, so I'll try and figure out what's going on with my mic, guys. But as long as we have our guests loud and clear and visible to us, we're good. Here's my next segue, and I know you're the perfect person to ask this. The secret societies themselves, what is the main difference between groups like the Jesuits, the Rosicrucians, Freemasons, and the Illuminati?
Well, the Jesuits, I wouldn't classify them as secret. Like everyone
Okay.
knew that the church has Opus Dei, which would probably be closer to their secret society, but that one doesn't really get as much traction normally. So you've got if we separate it into like the 1700s, I think the context of the 1700s is the best place to compare all of these. So you've got the Jesuits, who had been in charge of academia and just general life for everybody for at least 2 centuries at that point. They were the known order. They were the ones that had been in charge and dictate how you live your life, essentially. That's the Jesuits. This is like the religion and state all combined.
Mhm.
And then within that environment where the church runs everything, you did have Rosicrucians, and Rosicrucians, they kind of were into alchemy. They were into a slightly more spiritual. They're almost like hippies, I guess, in a more sort of like ecclesiastic way, but that they were looking for deeper meanings and integrating sort of occult and esoteric teachings along with the concept of Christianity. Then you've got the Freemasons. The Freemasons started as a straight up commercial enterprise. They were just builders, and in order to get paid the right wages depending on what your rank was, there was no such thing as LinkedIn. You didn't have like a resume that you brought with you and then they called them on the phone and said, "Hey, did this guy work for you?" What you had was a secret password and a secret handshake, and that's how someone knew, like, oh, this guy knows what he's talking about. Otherwise,
Okay.
he wouldn't know this word and this secret handshake and all these other things that you would put him through. Because it's not like you're going to sit someone down and be like, okay, build me a little mini cathedral before you build the real one, so I know that you know what you're talking about.
Mm.
So that's how operative masonry started to get start. And then over time, the people that are being hired to build castles and cathedrals, they develop political power, because who doesn't want a badass cathedral or an awesome castle to be built other than the Pope or some large bishop or a king somewhere. So over time, having that knowledge means that you've got power, money, and political power. So these different groups are all kind of formidable, but they all stand for totally different things. Jesuit is the old world order. They've been around for a while. They're just riding off of the power that they've always had. The Rosicrucians aren't necessarily powerful. They're just a small club that has very high standards. You can't just join them unless they want you to join. I don't even know if the the Freemasons or even Rosicrucians were necessarily secret societies. What they would both say is they were societies that had secrets. So you could know about them. You could even know where they were meeting, but you just weren't allowed to attend or know what they were talking about behind closed doors, which now in the corporate world, you would just call that intellectual property, right? You would just call that trade secrets. You wouldn't necessarily call that like a secret society just because you have trade secrets. So you've got Jesuits, Rosicrucians, Freemasons. You could technically at one point in time be a member of all three of those and not necessarily have any conflict. But the Bavarian Illuminati came along and they kind of changed the dynamic between all those different groups. The Bavarian Illuminati, specifically in Bavaria, Adam Weishaupt, he's basically being taken care of by an uncle, and that uncle runs the College of Ingolstadt, University of Ingolstadt. And while he's basically running this entire school, the Pope declares that the Jesuits are out. Like we no longer need the Jesuits. We're going to change directions a little bit. And as soon as that happens, he ends up taking over the college, and he puts his sort of foster son, Adam Weishaupt, in charge of canon law. And I think he's the youngest ever in history to be appointed to this like very high prestigious position. And Adam Weishaupt, he's still fairly young. He's got that like rebellious late teens, early 20s vibe to him. And he's trying his best to dismantle this Jesuit power structure that prevented him from learning the things he wanted to learn. And like he just saw it as this old, antiquated, outdated like set of rules that was holding him and the rest of the people that believed in the Enlightenment back. So he takes over essentially this Jesuit stronghold, turns it into an Illuminati stronghold, and then realizes if he wants to keep growing, he has to get more members. And the place that he looks to get members from are the Freemasons and the Rosicrucians. So now all of a sudden, being a Bavarian Illuminati member could mean that you were all of those things. You could have been a Jesuit and a Rosicrucian and a Freemason and Bavarian Illuminati all at the same time. Over time, though, now all of a sudden, if you're running a Freemasonic lodge and you notice that someone's coming in and like siphoning all your members, or that they have less time for you because they're going to this new club that they just joined. So now you can see where a little bit of the animosity between these different groups would start to emerge. They also had completely different outcomes. Again, the Jesuits was just keeping the world running as it were, you know what I mean? Because they had already been running it for 200 years. Rosicrucians didn't necessarily aim to convert everyone to being a Rosicrucian. They just wanted more esoteric teachings in the rest of society. The Freemasons, again, they were just a guys-only club. They had very specific intentions. It's not like they were trying to convert everyone to be a certain thing. And then the Illuminati was the tiniest subset among all of those. And I would almost say that the Bavarian Illuminati stood apart in that they were the most like a modern day intelligence agency, way more so than Jesuits, Rosicrucians, or Freemasons ever even wanted to be. I think that from the ground up, Adam Weishaupt built this Bavarian Illuminati as if it were a CIA.
Why was it in like a lot of hip hop references, like the Illuminati?
So it got its first. So no one ever stopped talking about the Illuminati, even after they dissolved allegedly in the 1780s, I think, late 1780s. People continuously talked about them, wrote about them, and the lineage here is that first it's written about by Eliphas Levi in History of Magic. He mentions the Bavarian Illuminati in there. Then there's a letter between George Washington and some, I can't remember the name off the top of my head, that also mentions the Illuminati in context of Freemasonry and the American Revolution.
I think I'm familiar with it. Yeah,
was founded in 1776, the same year that the United States was essentially founded. So that connection had always kind of been there, and it's crazy that Adam Weishaupt does get brought up by George Washington in one of these letters.
What a small world! Like all these characters knew of each other, and hundreds of years later, we're talking about them.
Well, and one of the original conspiracy theories, even dating back to the 1700s, was that the Bavarian Illuminati was the one behind the French Revolution. And the French Revolution was kind of seen as a catalyst for the American Revolution. So just by like the transitive property, you could say that if the Bavarian Illuminati caused the French Revolution, then technically the Bavarian Illuminati also caused the American Revolution. But the Bavarian Illuminati was simply, again, it was like the CIA of the Enlightenment movement. So anyone that was attached to the Enlightenment movement would have been just as influenced by the Illuminati in that kind of case. But why you were asking, why do rappers talk about it? This is a weird twisting sort of lineage. So I've got this really great 2-book set, and I think it's called like the Encyclopedia of Conspiracies in America. That might not be the name for it, but I've got it somewhere in my bookcase by me. And they've got an entire section on conspiracy theories and African Americans. That's the name of like this section in this encyclopedia. And it makes such a great point that gets maybe like not a lot of attention, but that African Americans in America are probably the most used to not trusting the government out of any other socioeconomic group in the
So
entire
true.
country.
They're just
Because-
natural skeptics because of their experience.
Right. Yeah. Like
yeah.
their lived experience and everything that, everything that they know and have been taught is essentially like, don't trust the government. And that is very different. I mean, maybe Native Americans too, but they're such a minority that they don't really have as much of a cultural say
impact.
anymore.
Yeah.
So now you've got this one fairly large, very culturally influential group in America that has an inherent distrust of the government. So this means that anytime a conspiracy theory pops up that talks about the government working against you or some secret agents in the government, you don't have to sell that to the Black community as much as you would have to sell it to any other community. So over time, they end up adopting a lot of just any conspiracy theory that comes out because of that almost default state of distrust. So if you looked specifically into the founding of Nation of Islam, and then even more niche of that would be the Nation of Gods and Earths, or known as the Five Percenters. This is like the crux of people that understand Freemasonry. They understand Rosicrucianism. They know about the Tavistock Institute. They know about the CIA. Like they're into all of this. And these kind of lessons and this information gets repeated within these small little circles. And you've come to find that a lot of rappers, especially East Coast rappers, they come up with these 5% influences. So a lot of those early 80s, early 90s rap groups that are using things called like the Supreme Alphabet. This is like a lot of Wu-Tang, a lot of OG artists. They come from this tiny little sort of secret side, or a society of secrets that is already predisposed to believing all of these different conspiracy theories, and that makes its way into rap music. And then in a weird way, they kind of become the torchbearer for sharing this concept of the Illuminati with people that are removed from this from over 2 centuries.
Paranoid, Rebecca has a question for you. What was the point of movies like Angels and Demons or National Treasure? It seems many people got introduced to the idea of the Illuminati in movies like that. And oh yeah, the book Angel and Demons, I almost totally forgot about that. But
well, Angels and Demons was the prequel or the sequel to the Da Vinci Code, right? And the Da Vinci Code is really just a kind of a dumbed down version of Holy Blood, Holy Grail. And Holy Blood, Holy Grail was a book that I mean, if you've read either of the Dan Brown versions, but Holy Blood, Holy Grail talked about this Merovingian bloodline where that Jesus Christ's blood was captured in either literally in a Holy Grail, and that you can like use it for DNA sampling or something, or that the Holy Grail was a vessel, which was actually a person, which was actually a bloodline, and that the actual bloodline of Jesus still existed modern day. And this is a theme of research that goes way before Da Vinci Code and Dan Brown. Like he just kind of found, it was almost like, how Disney takes the grim fairy tales and they sort of simplify it and they make it easier to digest and they fit it into like a 90-minute
for the popular
cinematic
masses,
experience. That's kind of what Dan Brown did to Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and then Dan Brown's books get adapted into TV and movies. So, but all of that is really just a summary of Holy Blood, Holy Grail, which I recommend to anyone that likes that kind of thinking, or though like that style of research. Holy Blood, Holy Grail is like a really engaging read. Once you get to the very end of it, it's a long read. So that one is, as much as people want to believe in all of the explanations for Christ, that one kind of goes with all of it. So that one is almost less of a conspiracy theory and more about, do you trust that everything the church has ever said? Do you think that the Vatican might be hiding anything? Because if you believe that the US government might be hiding something, then I think you'd have to believe the Vatican is too. They've been around longer, they got more secrets. And what was the other one that wasn't Angels and Demons? National Treasure?
Oh yeah, that was the other one. Was National Treasure, correct? National Treasure.
And that one, essentially, I like the premise of that one more. It's almost like, look at the back of a dollar bill. Why are all these symbols on it? Why are there 13 arrows and 32 feathers and 33 feathers? And what's that all-seeing eye all about? Maybe it's some sort of secret code that leads you to treasure. And I think that National Treasure is almost like the tale of the Philosopher's Stone or alchemists creating gold, where if you read it on its surface, then alchemists making gold might just sound like someone turning actual lead into actual gold and becoming rich off of it. But then there's like a philosophical interpretation where they're talking about maybe spiritual gold, where you take just a normal person and their mentality and their outlook, and then you make gold out of that, where it's this big personal transformation.
Oh,
Treasure is very similar. National Treasure is the version of alchemy where you're looking at it as if someone's literally turning lead into gold, but you can also watch it as National Treasure kind of means like a new golden age for America in a more abstract, like national sense.
okay. I've never heard of this movie, but yeah,
Oh, this one is such a good one. It's basically Tomb Raider meets conspiracy theory, and then Nicolas Cage is the main actor in it, and he just uses the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and like the back of a dollar bill as his treasure map.
oh. Going back to your website, Paranoid, I see a section where you're selling some rare books.
Yeah, these are ones that I've just read a million times. I've got all my notes out of them, and I've realized that they were very hard to find. So I mean, instead of collecting dust on my shelf, I'd rather someone else, grab some of these. And
Oh,
I'm
that's
glad I
pretty
did.
sick.
A lot of these I've actually moved. Actually, the John Todd one I think is gone now.
This one here?
Yeah, that's another really influential book that a lot of people don't realize, that this guy sort of defined modern Illuminati and modern Satanism. This guy, John Todd.
Could you tell us a little about it?
Yeah, he got his start recording these cassette tapes, these like audio lectures that he was putting out. And that's why this book, if you look on the left and right side of him, it's got all these little cassette tapes. John Todd claimed that he was a direct blood descendant of this Grand Druid Illuminati Council. He kind of just put a bunch of words together that sounded really impressive, and he told people that he had firsthand accounts of sacrifice and these crazy, satanic operations. He also said that he worked in the music industry and that he had, witnessed people selling their souls for music and doing all of the things that you hear now when someone brings up in 2024, like, oh, this rapper sold his soul. A lot of this is based on John Todd claims.
This is the original guy.
That's the original guy. This was
Wow.
not a book that he wrote. This was a book written about him and his life. But that is the guy, John Todd, that started a lot of that selling your soul to the Illuminati and to Satan in the music industry. But he didn't invent any of that. He just kind of regurgitated other occult and esoteric books and articles that he came across, but he made it widely acceptable in the form of these cassette tapes. But he owned occult bookstores, so he was able to get this into the hands of people that were already sort of predisposed to believing some of these things. he also ends up teaming up with Jack Chick. And if the pamphlets that you were showing earlier, the one that I did with Donut, that we're
Oh,
running
right.
a campaign for now, the Satanic Panic, these are all based on these old comic book publications called Chick Tracks. So Jack, and that was named after the guy that made them, called Jack T. Chick. Well, Jack Chick, he ends up hiring John Todd. They work together on a series of different pamphlets, and there was even a actual comic book series called The Crusaders that John Todd
Oh, wow.
sort of put a lot of his research into, and it was all about sacrificing, doing blood sacrifices in order for fame and riches. And if you want to get into the music industry, you're gonna have to go and kidnap someone, and we're gonna bring them back to our altar, and we're gonna wear robes and poke them with like a ceremonial dagger. All of that from Jack Chick Comics came from John Todd. And between the two of them, John Todd and Jack Chick had this pipeline that went directly to so many churches. The reason that his pamphlets got so popular is because they would send thousands to churches, and the churches would give them out to their parishioners for free. And you could go to like these religious bookstores, and it would be the only comic book available to all these people that were only going to Christian bookstores, and they wouldn't let your kid go to the regular comic shop. So these Jack Chick pamphlets influenced huge generations of people, and we wouldn't have a lot of those without John Todd. So there's a whole lineage here between all this. Yeah, John Todd is instrumental in the Satanic Panic and in Bavarian Illuminati claims.
Paranoid, kind of coincidence. You mentioned the 5%er. I'm working on another project. I haven't done my research yet, but I'm trying to bring in a guest who is a member of that religion, the 5%er Nation of Islam. Yeah. So it's funny, you like what a small world. And I also wanted to ask you, uh, going back to the government and all that, and seeing that you covered this in a lot of your presentations, the CIA and mind control projects like MK Ultra, and there's a whole litany of literature, and we can deep dive. But if you were to sum up what MK Ultra and Project Monarch, have you ever heard of it? I only heard of this when I was looking into MK Ultra to ask you these questions. Like, what are their purpose, and how effective are the stuff the CIA came up with, like using
Well, MK Ultra was a huge umbrella project that had no less than like 200 sub projects under it. And basically, the most boring version of MK Ultra summary is that it was just the financial wing of keeping records of who the CIA was paying money to in exchange for mind control research. And the MK Ultra was sort of born out of a few different things. One of the main catalysts was after World War II, the GIs found uses of mescaline in one of the German camps. I believe it was Dachau. I think the Dachau camp, they found records and they found actual mescaline. And mescaline was somewhat known. Native Americans had been using it for a while, but it didn't have any like known medical properties. And what the GIs found was that the Germans were using it for interrogation. And I don't know what exactly were in these notes, but this is the most often cited of the US said, okay, well, if they're taking this seriously, then maybe we should too, because we don't want to be left in the dust that there's actually something to this. So MK Ultra somewhat is born out of the tail end of World War II. And through that, first it starts as there's a whole bunch of different projects, but the main one I think is Project Chatter in the Navy. And this is when they start giving recruits different amounts of drugs just to see how loose-lipped they'll get. I think that was the reason for the name, Project Chatter. Like, will they talk? Will they chatter if you give them all these drugs? From Chatter, then it becomes Project Bluebird. Project Bluebird ends up becoming, I think, Artichoke, and then Artichoke slowly turns into MK Ultra, which is this massive operation that is the biggest version of it that I think it's ever been disclosed. So MK Ultra, with all these sub projects, imagine it like this: that all across the country, and actually Canada is one of the biggest areas that the MK Ultra scientists would come from. But the CIA is saying we need to find out all we can about mind control, and they send people out into the field, out into colleges and universities to see what type of studies they're doing, and if any of those align with this like mind control. Who's studying mescaline? Like they've obviously been sleeping on it, because there was a known chemical formula for mescaline by 1901. I think as soon as they discovered how to synthesize adrenaline in a lab, someone also noticed how close it was to mescaline and a whole bunch of other hallucinogens. So we knew about mescaline for a good 40, 50 years before we actually gave any attention to it as if it could be some sort of military weapon. And the fear was that the Germans might have been studying this all along. They
Okay.
might be 50 years ahead of us. So we got to
Yeah.
make up for lost time.
Because the CIA
So,
was 1945, right, or something. They're
right.
not.
And before that, it was the OSS. And before the OSS, it was just kind of a loose collection of FBN, which was the predecessor to the DEA and the ATF. Like it was all separated, but it was this particular moment, World War II. They found out the Germans were definitely using hallucinogens to interrogate people and maybe make them act differently. Now it was like, okay, we need to give this such a focus that it's going to span across not just the Navy and not just the Air Force or the Army. Like this has to be a CIA wide operation. And because it was originally inspired by things happening internationally and not domestically, that brought it into the CIA's purview. So the CIA is at the helm of all of this. And here's the best analogy that I think I've come up with so far, is that the CIA is almost like a sports team, and the sports team sends out talent agents all across the world the same way that like a baseball team might send out talent agents. And their entire job is to just kind of go to a bunch of different games and pay attention. And when there's like a pitcher or hitter or someone they see that could absolutely be like an all-star, then they try and sign them, right? They go and they give them a contract and say, hey, come play for our team and we'll give you all this money, and we'll give you the best training the world has to offer. You'll swing the best bats, and you'll have your own sneaker endorsement, like all of the things that you could ever want from this profession, we can give it to you. The CIA does that, but they do it to scientists. They do it to people that are researching neurochemistry or like behavioral analysis. But this is the closest version that you're going to get to an all-star scouting you. So the CIA doesn't necessarily play baseball, right? Like the scouts don't necessarily know how to hit a home run, but they can spot someone that does know how to do that. So the CIA sends all their field agents out to recruit all these different scientists, and MK Ultra is a collection of all of those different scientists that the CIA ends up getting signed onto their roster. And even more than that, the person that gets to cut all those checks, or if you're high enough up in the CIA, you now have access to all the research that no one else knows about in one collected area. So that's kind of the whole premise of MK Ultra, was the CIA amassing as much information about controlling the human mind as it possibly could.
Amazing. Yeah, it makes sense. It's like a database of all their like recruited minions, you might say.
Right. And a lot of the times the scientists that they were courting and trying to fund, they had limited resources. So of course they're willing to take a check. But even more than that, some scientists working at like a sanitarium, for example, they might have an idea of something that could work, but say like, oh, I've only got 20 patients, or hell, I've only got 80 patients. The military could come in and be like, well, we've got 200,000 recruits that we can test this on a massive scale that no researcher would ever be able to hope to actually apply some theory that they had. So the CIA represents this connection between the researchers and all of the resources that the military has. So it goes far beyond just financial incentives. Now all of a sudden, like, you can scale your research up on massive levels that were never seen before.
There was a comment left by Rebecca. Yeah, here it is. So she says, I watched a few Paranoid American videos yesterday and didn't finish his latest, but I saw it was on carrier pigeons, and he talked of 540,000 birds, etc. I think pigeons, like Paul Revere, are a cover for, is that techno communism, techno something.
It could be. I mean, yeah, we were talking about the movie Valiant, and
Valiant.
Valiant was specifically based on the role of messenger pigeons in World War II. But I was looking it up, and as recent as I think it was like 2006, there was some operation in Iraq. They were also using carrier pigeons, and the cool aspect of this is that the carrier pigeons, they'll operate even if there's some weird like satellite scrambling your comms, or if the hackers get in and change all of your technology, or they render technology useless through EMPs or whatever. The pigeons can still make it through. I mean, of course, there's probably a way that they can just like wipe all the pigeons out, but it's not as easy as being able to know exactly how to take down comms or lines of communication. And there's actually one of my favorite pigeon-based conspiracy sort of theories is that Nikola Tesla, in the final years of his life, he was known to be a misanthrope. Like he didn't like other humans or other people, but he became friends with pigeons, and he had
Oh,
like his favorite pigeons, and he would talk to them and feed them all the time. And some of the theories, though, is that he was actually using these as carrier pigeons, that he was using them because he knew even back then that phones could be tapped and that you could be electronically monitored through technology. So
wow.
pigeons are a way to circumvent modern technology and still deliver information.
Wow. Yeah, so he was a paranoid Croatian. He wasn't
Yeah,
American.
yeah, Slovenian or yeah.
That's pretty hilarious and smart. What's your take on Tesla, by the way? Because um, I it's almost too good to be true. His biography contrasted with his rival Thomas Edison. Like, don't you think that's almost Hollywood? Like, it sounded so scripted. One guy is this like r- successful tycoon. He knows how to conduct business, and then the other guy, he's a genius, but he's really bad at business, and he dies impoverished. It almost sounds too like storybook, like too
I'm a little
Hegelian.
biased here. I think as long as I can think back, I always had a distrust of a rags to riches story.
Same.
Um, but Tesla is not that. Tesla's is seems the most realistic outcome.
Oh,
It's very similar to like Van Gogh, right? Like Van Gogh dies penniless and sort of a laughing stock, and no one really appreciates any of his art. It's almost only posthumously does anyone give him credit. And something very similar could be said for Tesla. In fact, it almost feels that it's only the counterculture responsible for elevating Tesla and keeping his name relevant. I think that mainstream would be more than happy to just let him die off. Tesla was the inspiration for that mad scientist archetype that you see in cartoons and like Dr. Frankenstein, and harnessing lightning and using that to create monsters and death rays and stuff. That's what mainstream wanted everyone to think of as Tesla for the longest time, that he was like this villain, and that Edison was the harbinger of truth and new technology and saving us from ourselves. So I do think that Tesla, in my mind, in a biased way, gets credit because he died penniless and broke and the enemy of all of the industry titans. So I think he was legitimately a genius, and I think it was almost a miracle that he was even born in the right time, that we could harness even a fraction of the technology that he was kind of dreaming up. But he was also maybe born a little ahead of his time, that the rest of the world had not caught up to what he was trying to do. And the main thing that usually, like the conspiratorial aspect of Tesla and like the woo version, is his free energy approaches, and that
right.
he had this idea that you could just tap into the Earth's ionosphere and just get unlimited energy as often as you wanted in any capacity, and that you could even disperse it wirelessly without rolling any cables out or anything, and that it would be harmless, that you could just hold a light bulb up in the air with your hand and nothing bad would happen to you. Um, all of these things were counter to the business model that had already been established. Like if your job is laying wire or selling copper wire or anything that has to do with the physical transmission of energy, someone telling you, "Oh, it's free and it's wireless now," like that, you just put entire industries out of business.
Yeah.
So I don't think that the industry was ready for a mover and shaker like this. And then also, he originally was getting funding, I think, from Westinghouse, and he was from J.P. Morgan, I think, and some of that money he was using to fund this Wycliffe Tower, which was going to tap in and make all this free energy. So he's actually taking his competition's money and using it to work against them by providing free energy to everyone. So he creates the biggest adversary you could possibly create by making JP Morgan his villain, and then it's all downhill from there. Another link to the Titanic sinking. One of my other favorite conspiracy theories is that
Oh, right.
yeah, the Titanic sank. It was literally owned by JP Morgan. He had his own custom room created for it. He called out at the last second. It sinks, and two things happen. One is that all of the people that were against the formation of the Federal Reserve drowned on that boat, but also the last remaining financier of Tesla was John Jacob Astor. He also died. So JP Morgan makes out three incredible ways. Yeah, funny that I've got another comic specifically about this, but
You reminded I had the
makes
tab
out-
open. Sorry,
he
go ahead.
he doesn't have resistance to the Federal Reserve. That's one huge bonus. He takes out the last person that's willing to give this crazy Tesla guy any money, and Tesla was working against him. So that's two bonuses. And then the third one is that the Titanic was well insured at this point. So when it sank, he was able to reclaim a whole bunch of insurance money on this boat. So he wins three different ways in huge, huge ways. Like most of the time, if you're investigating a murder or a crime, you're looking for just one good motive. In this case, JP Morgan's got three amazing motives in order for this to all happen. And I would almost say that Tesla would have been just as strong of a reason as anything else, even more so than the Federal Reserve, at least at this point.
That's pretty compelling. Like, it almost sounds like he was the Larry Silverstein of the 1910s.
100%, yeah, just like Larry Silverstein. Larry Silverstein saw that he had a financial liability on his hands. He had this building full of asbestos that was going to take all this money to clear it out and retrofit it, or even if he wanted to knock it down and build a new building in its place, the disposal of that asbestos was going to cost a fortune. So how convenient would it be that if just some disaster happened that took that building out for him, and he's not responsible for the asbestos because he wasn't the one that spread it all over the city in a powdered form. So he makes out in a bunch of different ways. And the same thing that JP Morgan, one of the theories is that the Titanic was really a reconstruction or painted to look like its sister ship. I think it was called the Britannia, and that one had been badly damaged in a previous collision, but that he did not have it insured. So what he did was that after the ship gets damaged, then he insures the Titanic, but he paints the Britannia to look like the Titanic and then sinks that thing so that he can finally claim the insurance money on it.
This is Paranoid American's YouTube channel, by the way, guys. Make sure to subscribe. Try not to miss his live streams. He's usually collaborating with someone, or always collaborating with someone. I guess Rebecca was also watching your latest one with the carrier pigeon. It was on that movie. What was the movie?
Valiant.
Valiant, yeah. And what projects do you have coming up, Paranoid? I know you have your Kickstarter campaign. I'm going to pull that up, but anything else?
Yeah, I've got a bunch on the horizon after all of these Kickstarters are through. One of them is the biggest graphic novel that I've ever attempted to date. I think it's getting around 200 pages. I really maybe should just start releasing it issue by issue, but
Nice.
it's essentially a 200-page graphic novel about Lee Harvey Oswald being trained in voodoo, and essentially he's becomes this spiritual protector of JFK in a way. So it's a retelling of the JFK assassination, but Lee Harvey Oswald is sort of like a good guy. He's like a shaman that's trying to battle these demons. And it was originally called Lee Harvey Oswald Demon Hunter, but since I started it, there's been a bunch of comics that all have like name colon Demon Hunter. So now the name of it is currently Lee's Demons. And it's all of the inks are completely done. And I think the first like 20% of the book, I think like 50, yeah, about 50 pages have been colored, but it is just a massive effort. So that's going to be a future Kickstarter that will actually need to raise funds just to get the colors finished. But that one's been on the horizon for a while. I've been working on that one for a very long time. It's a huge project. And then what else? I've got a video game that's coming out
Oh, nice.
eventually. I was hoping this year, but it is not easy to run one of these Kickstarter campaigns. It's like more than like any job I've ever had that I'm putting hours into these things. But I've got another one that'll probably be coming up very soon after this one ends, and it's called Lucifer Lives in Lower Manhattan. And this actually was kind of born out of my satanic panic research. I found this one specific thread of Satanism in the 1930s and 1940s in downtown Manhattan, like in this like very upscale society of people that were also worshiping Satan. So instead of just turning it into another comic, which would have taken me forever, and also it wouldn't have captured all the nuance, I ended up making a video game around it. It's a visual novel that you can basically play. It's called a VN. But that one is done and ready to be released as soon as I have enough time to dedicate to like promoting it and explaining it and making the catchy commercial and all of that.
Honestly, a Paranoid, like I'm now a fan. I'm sure a lot of my listeners are also going to enjoy your art, and hopefully they're going to back your projects, the ones you've got going now and future ones that are coming up. Uh, do you have any coming live streams? I know you go every night with the donut at
Yeah,
11
we try
p.m.
our best to go live every night around 11 Eastern with Donut. Sometimes a little earlier, sometimes it's late, sometimes we have to take a day off and do other stuff. But also we're ramping this up. And I don't think I'm giving anything away too much, but some of the things that me and Donut have been talking about. So now we're not only are we doing those nightlies, but we're also going to end up doing a few different guest features or interviews. So I think tomorrow we're going to have Juan Ayala on from the One on One podcast, and
Okay.
talk about a whole bunch of other information on that. And then also we've got some movie reviews that we're about to be doing. And then I'm pretty sure that Donut has mentioned a couple times that in the last week of the campaign, this Illuminati comic campaign, we might even have a 24-hour like streaming extravaganza. I don't
Oh,
know
nice.
how much I can commit to that, but that'll probably be a pretty big deal.
Yeah, the energy will you better sleep in the day before because
We'll have
you
to take shifts or something. I don't know if we can just stay awake for 24 hours straight, but there's going to be a 24-hour stream that's just nonstop conspiracy and symbolism analysis and talking about the Illuminati for 24 hours straight.
Paranoid. I forgot one question, and then I'll leave you alone. I forgot to mention your Mormon series. You also have a series on the Mormons.
Yeah, monthly Mormon Mondays, which we
Mar-
actually do more than once a month now, just because it's been so popular. And my whole entire fascination with Mormonism is it's like threefold. One is that it is uniquely an American religion. It's a pretty new religion as well. It's probably the newest big religion that's even on the planet. Like the other one that gets referred to is maybe Islam, but Islam, even being a new religion, it's not new, like only 200 years old, right? So
Yeah.
Mormonism is an interesting snapshot in time and uniquely American. Plus, its roots are in Freemasonry, so like there would be no Mormonism without a secret society of Freemasonry. And then finally, I've got like this personal connection because, like I said, this isn't the reason, but when 9/11 happened, or at least when I found out that 9/11 had happened weeks ago, was literally like halfway through the Book of Mormon, not for any specific reason. It was just the only book that wasn't taken, right? So that was that weird connection. And then the first actual base that I went to actually work on as an enlisted member, my entire chain of command had like 3 Mormons. My direct supervisor was a Mormon.
Wow.
I can't remember his last name, Captain something or other. But
Sorry.
all of the guys that I work with in the military that were Mormon, it was so weird because I remember growing up, I was raised Catholic, but I wasn't like in a Catholic community. I was in like a WASP community, right? Like a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant kind of community. And I remember that feeling of that everyone's being nice, but they're not really nice. They're kind of like smiling at you, but they also are like talking smack about you behind your back. And maybe they wouldn't help you out if they saw you in trouble because you were lesser than or something. I just remember that as this normal vibe that I got from everywhere my entire life, except for when I was interacting with these Mormons that were in my direct chain of command. Like these are the guys that would be like, hey, if you need anything, middle of the night, you need a call, if your car needs a jump, any of that. The first time that they meant it and they like actually like stood by it, like this was actually part of their life philosophy, was to actually be helpful and be like a very upstanding and accountable person. And I didn't realize this at the time. I was making fun of them even back then, like, haha, silly Mormons and your handshakes and your underpants
Dorks.
and all this stuff. Yeah, you dorks. And it really was. It was very much like, oh, you don't even drink coffee or soda? Like, you don't drink alcohol? What are you? That's weird. What do you do for fun, right? Oh, you just read your Mormon Bible? That's kind of silly. But it was only in retrospect, like a decade later, that I slowly realized, like, wow, those really were the most upstanding people that I ever worked with, that had the most like sort of integrity. And of course, this is in the subset of the military, not just any Mormons anywhere, but just the Mormons that were in my chain of command. But it made such an impression on me that I became more fascinated than just making fun of them, just watching the South Park episode and laughing about how idiotic they all are. And it after a while, it just started making more and more, not the religion making sense, but that this community being a new wave of like enlightenment, or this continuation of Freemasonry or secret societies. Like Mormonism is a version of all of that combined. It's secret society, it's Freemasonry, and it's religion, and it's sci-fi, and it's like political movements all combined in this very unique American aspect. So I'm not around to endorse being Mormon. I'm not ex-Mormon. I'm not anti-Mormon. I'm not pro-Mormon. I'm just absolutely fascinated and think that it's the closest thing that we've got to analyze what actually goes into creating a religion. Like there's nothing else this close to us that we can use as like a study guide.
So, according to you, Joseph Smith was 100% a Freemason.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Makes sense. Yeah.
I mean that's not even debatable. That like he was clearly a Freemason. He was raised. There's papers that show he was raised. The only thing that kind of comes up in contention is that, did he continue being a Freemason, or did he just like take what he learned there and turn it into Mormonism? Are Mormons really just Masons and they don't know it? That's where all of the debate comes up. But it like clearly he was raised in the Freemasonry. There's no other way he would have known a lot of this, even if he had gotten one of the secret little books that was released that had like all the handshakes and stuff in it. You can read one of those, but you don't just like base your entire religion around that unless there's something more to it and you've been impressed by it beyond just some book. So I definitely think that he was absolutely a Freemason. And in fact, Mormonism might even be sort of an updated version of Freemasonry, more modern than we've got in just regular Masonic lodges now.
That makes total sense. So, Paranoid, I think I've exhausted all my questions. I've probably exhausted you too. You were busy with your, before our interview, you were busy with your video editing for your previous work. So, you must be looking forward to just resting. And I'm just excited to have you for the first time on the Boq Precision channel. Hopefully, you become a recurring guest. I don't think I've even touched the tip of the I know, cliche, tip of the iceberg. But let me just play. I don't think I've heard this one yet. Let me just play this video. This is from your monthly Mormon Mondays.
Sure. Is this the intro video or is this an episode? Because sometimes on the episodes we play like music for a while.
Oh, okay. Let me make sure it's let's see. What is that? This is
so this is probably just some audio that's playing while we're getting ready to start, and then I play like it's a 30-second intro that's got words on the screen.
Oh, okay, my bad. I thought it was going to be one of your catchy.
We got no. I think there might be in this one. You can give it a shot if it's only like 30 seconds long. It's probably the right one.
I think it is. Yeah, it is.
I don't hear it for some reason.
Oh, oh well, it's a glitch. It's the same thing that happened the first time. It's my StreamYard. It's my StreamYard.
I've been doing my best to make them catchier, but also shorter. I'm trying to make them all about 30 seconds or less now,
Really?
which I think just makes them even catchier.
I like the minute, but it's your call. You're right.
It's hard. It's hard. Some people complain so much about my podcast intro, which is like a minute and 5 seconds. But I get so many comments that's like, "This is too long." But I don't know. I'm all for the longer ones too.
So, Paranoid, are you going to be live tonight?
Yeah, the plan is we're going live tonight at about 11:11. And then I don't know if we've got anything specific planned, but tomorrow night we talk to Juan, and then we also are going to talk to PJ Williams of Dark Waters podcast. He used to do Conspiracy Pilled, and now he's got a new one. And then the night after that, we're going to have Ryder Lee on, the guy that just released the documentary called Clockwork Shining. I'm blanking on the name right now, but it's the latest Stanley Kubrick documentary that just came out. And then we're going to talk to David Charles Plate, one of the guys behind I'm Sorry, Cassandra, which is this movie about 9/11 being predicted by Back to the Future. So we've got a whole bunch of different lives and interviews and stuff set up for this next 2 weeks.
Awesome. I'm wishing you the best, and everyone who watches this, make sure to subscribe to Paranoid American. Check out all his Kickstarter campaigns. And with that, I'm going to play the Illuminati comic one more time, and
Thank you so much.
we're out.
Illuminati comic. Yeah, Illuminati comic. You know you want it. This Illuminati comic.
Learn about the full history of the Bavarian Illuminati. Adam Weishaupt, Alumbrados, Jesuits, Rosicrucians, Freemasons, and more. From the 18th century to modern day, we expose it all.
Yeah, Illuminati comic. You know you want it. This Illuminati comic.
That's right, it's the Illuminati comic from Donut and Paranoid American. Get yours now at IlluminatiComic.com.